Okay. All right. Okay, everybody, welcome to our Second District PTA 411 meeting. We're always happy to have you with us. We're a little bit smaller group tonight. I know there's a lot of different events going on, but we're really glad that you can join us. Tonight's event is, we're so lucky to have Rachel Norton and Stevon Cook with us. They are recent members of the school board, perhaps happy they're not on the board right now with all of the stress and challenges our school board is facing. But we're really glad that they can join us tonight for a conversation. If you have questions for them, you can post them in the chat. We'll get to whatever we can. I have several that I'm going to start us off with. But before we get going, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Michelle Parker. I'm the Vice President of Legislation for the Second District PTA. I think we've got a few folks here who from the Second District PTA. Sharon Olson is the Communications VP. And I think we have a couple of others here. Oh, and Melissa Mountain, who is our parliamentarian, is here. So thanks to them for joining us, and also to let you know about these 411 meetings, which we started almost a year ago when the pandemic began, because PTAs were really looking to connect with one another. People were feeling really isolated. They were feeling they needed information to support their school communities through this time. And so we started doing these and had lots of them during the spring, several during the summer, and then a little less frequently in the fall as people became overwhelmed with all the things they had to do and filled their time now that we all live on Zoom. But we have lots of these this spring, and we'll probably have them every week until school gets out. We won't have one next week because it's spring break, but we're looking right now, actually the week after spring break, at probably doing a town hall with the San Francisco Department of Public Health, DCYF, which is the Department of Children, Youth, and Their Families, and the school district. Getting some clarity around some of the health guidance, how the decisions are made, how that interacts with how that trickles to the school district, and everything related to that. It's related to an event that the DPH wanted to do last week when we were doing our town hall with the district and Parents for Public Schools that they had to cancel. And so we're going to do some version of that event right after spring break. And then we're also going to do an Advocacy 101 session in April, as well as bring Principal Michael Essien, who is the principal at Martin Luther King Middle School, to do a session on equity, which we're really excited about. He's awesome. So look forward to those. And now we'll go ahead and get started. So I was thinking, actually, by way of introduction, probably most of you have heard our school board members at some point, but you may not know that we recently gave them honorary service awards at our Founders Day event back in February to thank them for their service to our students and families for their many years. And I hope don't embarrass them too much, but I thought maybe I could actually just share the introductions that we gave that day to recognize them as their introductions tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll start off with Rachel. We were pleased to honor Rachel Norton's many years of service to the children and youth of San Francisco. She spent 12 years of service to the students of SFUSD as a member of the Board of Education, and prior to that spent many years in volunteer roles, including on the Community Advisory for Special Education, the Autism Speaks Bay Area Advocacy Committee with Parents for Public Schools and others. A parent of 2 SFUSD graduates, Rachel has helped countless parents navigate our school district through her blog, which she wrote for many years after every single board meeting, to help the public understand what issues were before the board and to give them context. Her long tenure on the school board enabled her to provide critical insight and direction, particularly in her roles as Budget Committee Chair and the Student Assignment Committee Chair, as the district moved through several iterations to land on a new student assignment policy this past December. Her early years on the board were difficult times for the district as we faced the economic impacts of the Great Recession, and she took some hard votes to keep the district financially stable and also to prioritize stability and consistency for students, keeping them centered in decision-making. Rachel has been the board commissioner we have all relied on to ask the hard questions to make sure students with disabilities were receiving the services they need. And that work has made tremendous progress while she was on the board and is set up to continue improving now that she is no longer there. And beyond the work she's done for many years to support students and families in our schools, Rachel's day job for the past 7 years has been supporting and championing parks and open spaces, locally with the San Francisco Parks Alliance, and now statewide for the last several years at the California State Parks Foundation, another critical part of a healthy ecosystem for San Francisco families. So thank you, Rachel, for your many years of service. And now I'll introduce Stevon, and then we'll get started with our questions. We were also pleased to honor Stevon Cook's many years of service to the children and youth of San Francisco. Stevon is a graduate of San Francisco Unified School District from Thurgood Marshall High School, whose engaging staff he credits with transforming him and developing his leadership skills as he became an active student leader on the SFUSD Student Advisory Council. After college, Stevon returned to San Francisco to uplift young people and serve the community, and became an academic advisor at his alma mater, Thurgood Marshall, helping hundreds of youth with a variety of issues and running several innovative and impactful college support programs. Stevon also served in the Community Advisory Committee for the Public Education Enrichment Fund and worked at the San Francisco Education Fund, continuing his work to improve post-secondary outcomes for the first-generation students of color. Most recently, Stevon started a new organization, Mission BIT, to build professional pathways for under-resourced high school youth across the San Francisco Bay Area by making computer science more accessible. While Stevon spent fewer years on the Board of Education than Rachel did, the 4 years he spent were marked with a calm, thoughtful leadership, recognized and appreciated by his peers and the public. One of his last contributions in this role was to author a landmark Black Studies resolution with the goal to create a curriculum that honors Black lives, fully represents the contributions of Black people in global society, and advances the ideology of Black liberation for Black scholars. The Black Studies curriculum will include classes across all age levels and with a wide breadth of topics. Once fully implemented in the 2022-23 school year, an SFUSD pre-K to 8 student will be introduced to the concept of race, racial identity, African and African American history, equity, and systemic racism. SFUSD high school students can choose from UC A to G approved courses, including topics like African history, culture, and geographies, African diasporic studies, African American history and phases of African American resistance, and classes on classic and modern African American, and diasporic literature. This resolution received praise not only for the scope, but for the depth of the resolution. So Stevon, thank you for your leadership on this and in many other areas throughout your service to our youth in San Francisco. All right, so we'll get started. So I have a few things I just wanted to bring up first, and maybe, I don't know which one of you wants to answer this, but first, let's start with some basics. What's the role of the school board in relation to the superintendent, the SFUSD staff, the Board of Supervisors, and the State Board of Education? Just give us, for people who are pretty new to paying attention, they may not know, what is your job and how do you fit into everything else? Stevon, would you like to take that one?
I'm retired, so.
You're both retired. One of you's got to take it.
I'll start.
Still learning my job, but
you want to start?
I'll do a quick technical thing, and then Rachel, you can fill in gaps.
I'll be your color. Yeah, your color one.
Okay. So yeah, so the Board of Education is responsible for essentially setting curriculum standards, hiring and firing personnel, making budget decisions on behalf of the county that it represents. So most counties have a Board of Education. In San Francisco, ours is elected. So it's the idea is that the public has a say in the direction of public schools. There's 7 members. The election is citywide. It staggers 3 and 4. This is something like, who gets on, who gets off, which is different from Oakland. Oakland is, geographical. They have like districts, and we have a citywide board. So a lot of our day-to-day it varies sort of depending on the topic, and the day-to-day looks very different, I think, right now than when we served. But we are hearing from the public about what's happening with their young people or families, what's happening with them in schools, and we're working directly with the superintendent to help guide and lead the district from a policy perspective. So the superintendent runs the day-to-day operations, and the board is the policy group that helps give guidance to superintendent and staff about different policy decisions or recommendations.
Nope, he just froze.
He froze, Stevon. All right, he's on mute now. Well, I'll pick up from there. I mean, I think he covered the important technical basis. I think the one kind of there's two unique twists to San Francisco. One is that we are, but I mean, Stevon mentioned the county, that every county has a county board of education. Because we're a city and a county, the San Francisco Unified Board sits as both the county board and the Unified District Board. And so that's pretty unique. I think we're the only one in California, and we may be the only one in the country, I'm not sure. But anyway, so that's unusual. The other interesting little twist is that because San Francisco is a charter city, there are certain aspects of the board's compensation and election and oversight and how we fill vacancies that are managed by the city rather than the board itself. So in many other districts, for example, when there's a vacancy, the board actually appoints a new commissioner to the board. But in San Francisco, because it's governed by the charter, the mayor appoints to a vacancy. So there's other twists about that. But one thing that's kind of interesting and that has come up when people talk about particularly board compensation, because I don't know if people are aware, Hillary Ronan is thinking about introducing a charter amendment that would move us to district elections and also increase the compensation for board members. Because the compensation is set in the charter, it's set at $500 a month. Actually, because we are both a county and a city board, if we didn't have that in the charter, our compensation would be more like, I think the last time I looked at it, like $1,700 a month, because the ed code actually sets the compensation of school board members that's based on the enrollment of the district. So that's kind of an interesting, I always thought, like, just repeal it out of the charter and then board members get a bigger stipend. I'm not sure I want board members to be salaried. However much it would have been nice to have a salary when I was on the board. I have some thoughts about that if people want to talk about that, but that's beyond the scope of the question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Actually, just before I kind of flesh out some of that question I asked, can you, for folks who don't know, what does it mean that San Francisco is a charter city? Do you want to explain that bit that people might not?
Well,
can you explain
not
it well
being
enough?
a lawyer, I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble. But I mean, basically, there's there is a document that sets a bunch of rules about San Francisco that is different than otherwise the local city council or local leadership would set the rules and procedures and laws for the city. But because so much is in the charter, the voters, once it's in the charter, it can't be undone until the voters undo it. So it's just a higher bar of, one might say, accountability, or a higher barrier to change and flexibility.
Okay, so, all right, so San Francisco Unified is a state agency, right? And we have the San Francisco Board of Education separate. The mayor does not have any control over the school district. The Board of Supervisors doesn't. There's those interesting relationships that you just mentioned a minute ago. And so the next thing I want to ask you all about is, how do you learn how to do your jobs? How does one know how to be a good school board member? How do you figure out what it means to govern? Do you have any opportunities for training? What is your professional association? Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe even how you specifically learned what were the most important parts of your job and how to do them effectively? Stevon, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, just like copy paste Rachel Norton. That's kind of how I would do like a little like I miss Rachel. So I would do as much like a little like, I want to answer questions as
I
much
know,
as I
I miss
can.
you too.
I'm gonna
It's
throw
like a
that in.
little like, it's like deja
Periodically.
vu being on a Zoom call with you, but it's very nice to see you.
Right. And my internet is a little shaky. So yeah, I'm sure Rachel could pick up if I, whatever happens. So there is no training. The motivation to run, at least for me, was based on like wanting to solve a problem, and politics draws all types of people. So anybody can participate. If you win, there are a number of organizations that offer. We have the California what's the name of it? It's California Board.
Has it already been too long? You've forgotten.
California School Board
School Board Association,
Yeah.
California School Board Association.
Yeah.
And so they they do an annual training. They have access to other resources online, and our district pays to be a part of that membership. And so that's available to every school board member in California. And so there are the technical pieces of like, this is how you write a resolution, or this is like, what a superintendent's evaluation can look like, et cetera. But San Francisco likes to do things differently, so so going through those trainings may not necessarily prepare you for being on the school board in San Francisco. And San Francisco, in a lot of ways, ends up setting policies that the state picks up a few years later. So, we have some pros and cons to the way that we approach things. But so that's the technical answer. There's some other organizations that I joined while I was on the board that were specifically focused on, it was like a national collective of school members. And so there's a lot of who are proactive to seek it, but there's no requirement, like once you get in, it's just sort of, there's no like mandatory trainings that you have to attend. We have a few like trainings that we have to do for the district, but you're kind of on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I found the the CSBA trainings to be really helpful, and I made a lot of friends at CSBA. I was a delegate, so because of, it's a long story, but anyway, we have like 3 seats on the delegate assembly for in San Francisco. So I served as a delegate for all 12 years at CSBA, and one of the former school board members, Jill Wins, was actually the president of CSBA during the time that she was on the board. And they are, it's amazing when you go and meet all these other school board members. I mean, some of them are just knew so much chapter and verse about so much about their district, like would just run circles around me and any other member of our board, like just so well informed about how things worked and their budgets and how instruction worked and all sorts of stuff. So I learned a lot from other board members. I did the CSBA training. I always recommended to new members of the board that was a good place to start. And yes, Stevon mentioned the other organizations. I participated in the National School Boards Association, which we maintain a membership in, and also the Council of Great City Schools, which is the, I think the 50 largest school districts in the country. It's a much more diverse organization than either CSBA or NSBA. And those council meetings were really, really interesting, and really like learned a lot. And it's a whole, the issues of urban districts are actually very different than the issues of, the average school district, which is probably, much smaller, much wider, more rural. California has 1,000 school districts, and that most of them look very, very different than San Francisco. So, so it was a range of experiences, but really helpful to me, and kind of learning the ropes and learning how to ask questions and what were the, how do you be a school board member?
That's great. And the Council of Great City Schools is we were part of the big ask to the federal government, right, for some stimulus funds. We were telling them how much we really needed to support our students through distance learning and to bring students back to school. And it was much, much more than they wrote into that first stimulus bill. But that was right. Am I remembering that correctly? That they're the group we did that with.
And some of our superintendents, our former like Richard Carranza and Carlos Garcia, were both very active in the council. Tony Smith, who was our deputy and then went to Oakland and then left Oakland, very active in the council. So we, over the years, have had a lot of clout in the council. And certainly when Richard was superintendent, I mean, he attended meetings in the Obama White House and really was able to advocate directly with the president about, for the district. And Arnie Duncan, who was Secretary of Education under Obama, was a former superintendent in Chicago and also was a member of the council, so knew everybody. So there's a lot of relationships there that are helpful.
Gotcha. So do you know who are the current CSBA delegates on this school board? Do either of you know who they are currently?
I believe that I don't think that they're going, unfortunately, but I believe that Jenny and Allison are two of our three members. I don't know if somebody else has been appointed. Pretty much the way it works in our district is, in some districts, it's actually very competitive and there's elections, like you have to run in your county against other school board members. In our district, it's sort of like we have so many seats that you can just do it if you want to. Mark Sanchez, I believe, is still the rep to the Council of Great City Schools to attend those meetings. But I'm actually not sure who's doing CSBA.
Okay, great. So getting into your time on the board, what would you say are the top one or two things that you're the most proud of that you were a part of leading or that were happening in the district while you served? Either one of you comes
Well, my tenure was shorter, so I'll do this.
Okay, go ahead.
At 12 years. And so in terms of policy accomplishments, I'm most proud of the Black Studies resolution and the school assignment resolution. So, and once we passed that, Rachel was really instrumental in bringing it forward, but it was a major pain point for a lot of families, and we'll see what happens as it gets rolled out. But tackling two big issues like that was really meaningful for me. And I think just personally, coming from Thurgood Marshall to be elected to the school board was like a great point of personal pride, because and I represent that school proudly, because I really do think it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. It was the reason I went to Williams. It was the reason I came back to education, and Kevin, who's also an alum, went to Thurgood. So just having a tradition, starting a tradition of folks from the Southeast side taking a part and being leaders in the city, like that's important to me.
Yeah, thank you. It is great, and it's so nice to see that you had that experience here, and that was such. You've talked about that many times about how meaningful that time was for you, and we appreciate you coming back to serve. What do you think was particularly instrumental that your teachers and the other staff and the experiences that you had at Thurgood that really were so transformational for you?
Thurgood really did an incredible job of us at like building this culture that was like aspirational, for the students that went to the school from the community. We believe something about ourselves because we went to Thurgood, and school institutions can do that. Like, oh, I went to Harvard, therefore I'm like better. Like, there's a long history in this country of different institutions giving that to people. But for Thurgood, the community really believed in the school, like there was a high interest and demand from the community to participate in the school, which was unusual for that side of the city. So it wasn't just like the students, but the families were like, we're a part of something special here. And so it's very, very hard to achieve that unless there is like buy-in and cohesion with the school site leadership and everyone that's at the site. And if you had to get an example, like Mission is kind of benefiting from some of that now. Like Mission is sort of the recent story of a school community where, there's a lot of under Eric, and I think it has continued, a lot of community partnerships, a lot of excitement, people wanting to be there. So school sites do that, I think, despite its board. I think that's like that's the when you pay attention, or as a result of what I've seen being a school board member and seeing how sites transform themselves, it doesn't happen every day that a school site can do that. So that's the broad answer.
Yeah, thank you. What can you talk a little bit why you thought that the student assignment resolution, both that one and the Black Studies resolution, were so important to you? Why did they feel so sort of landmark in the policies that you worked on? What was so important about them to you?
Well, Matt initially wrote the resolution on school assignment, and I wanted to be a part of trying to address it. And my interesting history with this topic is that I was actually, when I was first paying attention to it, for the existing system, because I believed in it was trying to achieve some of the goals in Brown versus Board of Education, right? That was like, it was trying to achieve integration, and it was just really troublesome and problematic to see it doing the exact opposite, and any attempts to change it sort of became like, also, and this happens with a lot of issues in our city, the attempts to change it became like a east side, west side of San Francisco sort of dynamic, where like race and class ends up being the subtext, which often happens in school assignment conversations. That's like always a part of what's happening. But the communities that the system was designed to support were being harmed. And so I think that for the board that like put it forward and that passed it, it was sort of like a thing we didn't touch. Like we didn't touch that for a long time, I mean, Rachel tried, I shouldn't say that. Do something, but it's supposed to be community.
Hope you're freezing, Stevon. All right, maybe we'll have Rachel jump in. It looks like
Well, when he comes back, he can. And is he back? Oh, he's back.
Are you back? You froze for a little bit.
Yeah, I saw that. Let me stop and I can come back. Let me see like my internet.
You'll have plenty. You have plenty of time to share your thoughts for the rest of this hour. So, all right, we'll move over to. Thank you for that. And Stevon, if you want to jump in and talk more about the Black Studies resolution, just let me know, because that was a big deal. Rachel, same question to you.
Well, I mean, I think I would have to start with the work around special ed. I'm extremely proud of that. And I got a lot of support. I see Jean Robertson, hi Jean, and I see Lee Fisher, and I see Martha Bruder, and a lot of people, I wouldn't have been even able to raise the issues that I was able to raise without a lot of support from parents and advocates and administrators. And but it was I don't know that, I kind of wish Katie Franklin were here because Katie Franklin, probably most of you don't know who she is, but she was kind of my partner in crime on the CAC for many years. And, when my daughter was starting to go to kindergarten, who, had an IEP, we realized that like half the schools in the district, I mean, talk about Brown versus Board of Education, like half the schools in the district, if you had an inclusion IEP, you used to have inclusion on your IEP, and that meant you could go to certain schools but not others, which just what is insane. It was insane. And it evolved from very good intentions on a lot of people's part. So it wasn't malicious, but that was why I ultimately ran to change it, was to say, all students are general ed students first, and our students with IEPs have to be much more part of the conversation and part of what happens in the classroom day in, day out. And I really want to give the administration a lot of credit, because once I got on, some people left, and then they were much more willing to talk to me and work with me. And certainly when Richard came on as deputy superintendent, he was very, very receptive to some of the changes that I was trying to make and the advocates were trying to make. And I feel like we did make change. I don't think it's fixed. I don't think anything is ever fixed, because this is such a complex and diverse system that there's always things that need to work better. And so I wouldn't ever claim to have fixed something, but I do think that I elevated the conversation. And I think that students with disabilities are much more a part of the mainstream conversation in this district because of the work that I did. And I'm really proud of that. And I also am proud of the student assignment work. I could not have done that work without the support from Stevon and from Mark, particularly on the committee. We were all very united about what needed to happen and the work that was done. And so I'm really grateful to Stevon and to Mark, because I think the three of us as the sort of senior board members at that time really understood that this work needed to happen. And it always becomes a very difficult conversation, as Stevon referred, it becomes East versus West, it becomes about class and race. And, that's why we have a student assignment policy, is to try to adjust for, those inequities that result. But I think, I really hope, I'm glad we got it to where we got it before we left the board. And there's a lot of work to be done. And if the investments are made and if the policy work continues to play out, it will be transformative for this district, for everything from transportation to program placement, so many things. It could really be the tip of the spear for the school district. And so I'm excited to watch how that plays out.
Yeah, and for those who weren't following that really closely, since that was a resolution that policy you all passed just in December, so it was just very, very recent. Can you give a quick, like, what's coming ahead? Because I know, and also if you all haven't seen, maybe you're not on the list to get on all of the meetings, get the notice for all the meetings as they come through, but they just had, I think it was this week or maybe it was last week, their first return back to ad hoc student assignment committee meetings for the school board. I believe that Kevin Bogus is the chair of that committee now. And so do you want to just tell people just in a couple sentences, like what's ahead, because it's not done. That was just the policy, but there's tons more work to do.
Tons of implementation to be done. I mean, I'm going to grossly oversimplify because we could spend, 2 hours just talking about student assignment, but essentially, it became very clear to me. I came into the board and as a parent advocate, and then as an early years on the board, felt very strongly about choice being an opportunity to desegregate schools and to give families, an expanded number of options to improve, their choices for their children. And over the years, what I saw was that choice, in fact, only benefits people who have the ability to take advantage of that choice system. And in addition to that, there are neighborhoods and parts of San Francisco that, that correspond almost perfectly to the redlining maps from the 40s and 50s. That there are, patterns and generational poverty and low achievement, and particularly affecting students of colors, primarily Black students, but Latino Pacific Islander students as well. And those are the exact areas that we were providing additional choices, basically through our policy, saying to families, yeah, we know the schools in your neighborhood are not good, and so you can choose somewhere else, you can go somewhere else, rather than what is really our responsibility, which is to resource schools in every neighborhood and to make sure that families in every neighborhood have good choices, so that they don't I mean, why put the burden on the families to have to leave and find another school in another neighborhood that suits their needs better, right? Or that they think is better for their kids. It felt to me over the years, I just began to feel like this is us like outsourcing this to families, as opposed to the district taking responsibility for what it needs to provide at every school. So the new policy basically limits that choice. Every address will be part of a zone, essentially, that families will be able to choose from a small number of schools in that zone. I think it's 10. I think we landed on like 10-ish. So there will be some choice, and obviously because of San Francisco the way it is, the zones will be drawn in such a way that that they are diverse. You will not be assured of getting any particular school, but you will be assured of getting a school in your zone. So I think it balances both, the years that we've heard from many families that they want, geographical access to the schools in their geographical area. That we also heard that families want certainty. And so we're trying to balance all of those factors. I don't know, what did I leave out, Stevon?
I thought that was a great summation. Yeah, it was, and it was about the what was next. So what is next, Rachel? Do you know?
Well, I mean, so now what they have to do is they have to, first of all, figure out what the zones should look like, right? Then they have to see, okay, can we what programs do we have to move around to provide equitable opportunities to all of the different program options that we have? And we have a lot. I mean, language is a perfect example. There's so many language programs around the district. Special education is another, area where there's a lot of concern. And so, I think that families who have students with IEPs will have a different portfolio of options based on where they are, but that mimics the same portfolio of options that students have across the district. So it's complicated. I mean, it's hard for me to even explain it at the level, at this level, and it's going to be really complicated to figure out, but it potentially means that programs could need to be shifted around the city to provide that equitable access. They will need to design transportation routes that, give, once they've designed zones, that give students within the zone equitable access to all the schools in the zone. So there's a lot of work to do.
Right, massive overhaul. And there's a comment that was just posted in the chat, is that I would say, yep, it's exactly right. The execution matters, so there's supposed to be a big engagement process with the community as all of this is determined. So those details were not determined when the policy passed. Okay, I want to move on because we could talk about this forever, and there's so many other things to talk about. There's perhaps 3 things that I would like to talk about with you both, and then whatever time is left, I'll take some of the questions that have been popping up in the chat. So I'll just tell you what the 3 things are now. I want to hear about what you think were the most challenging parts about being on the board, whether there was something really hard time, a hard vote, just a challenge that you faced, and dealt with whether it resulted in something you were really proud of or successful or not, whatever that is. I want to ask about that. I'm also going to ask you about superintendent search, because you were both part of that before. And so I would love to hear from you how that worked, recommendations, what you think is going to happen, how the board, I mean, I know you can't read the board's mind. You don't know how they're going to handle the current superintendent search when Dr. Matthews retires, but I want to ask you about that. And then the other thing to be thinking about is I'm going to ask you about how parents can effectively advocate to the board. How are they most effective? You know, when you received advocacy, what worked the best for you, where you were able to hear it, and just what were the ways that parents advocated that were effective? So those are the three things. And then we'll, whatever time we've got left, we'll go to some of these questions in the chat. Stevon, should we go back to you? What were the biggest challenges you faced on the board?
Capacity is a big challenge. I was running an organization that really needed all of me, like mission needed all of me. And when you're on the school board, it needs pretty much all of you. So to be good at it, you know, so one of the things I was really trying to focus on was like, how do I strengthen the capacity of the office to better staff, support board members? And that all kind of went nowhere, you know, because yeah, it was like I was trying to, like, you know, okay, let's redo the way the office looks and make it more suitable for community conversations. I don't know if I'm breaking up again. Let's redo. Let's figure out some sort of staffing model so people can have more like background and time before they actually have to make some of these decisions. So capacity was a big issue. Let's see, another one. There were definitely votes, like the way that the timing happened with some of our votes, where like I didn't have a choice, you know. And these were like, hey, if we don't vote on this now, you know, it's going to be like, it's like all these ramifications, this cascade happens, and it's like the sky is falling. And so that really bothered me deeply. But, you know, I wanted to do responsible things, so I just had to get over it and kind of do what we needed to do. There, you know, I think the district takes a lot of great measures to keep people safe, you know, like people, like children and families safe. And there were times where like we got media attention because people weren't safe, and I don't think it reflected how hard people work to do that, you know. And so whenever people's safety is at risk, like that bothers me personally. And I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't safe. So, you know, seeing the district not represented, I think, is as strong as it actually is. You know, you just kind of take, you know, the type of people that are behind the scenes working hard. So there's that. And then, you know, the stuff that I stepped into that was, I would say, challenging because of the attention. You know, the Pledge of Allegiance stuff that I did, like that was like initially way more attention than I thought I was going to get. I was like, whoa, you know, I was like, I
my
didn't
fault.
expect that.
I told the Chronicle, and I'm embarrassed about that. But anyway, sorry about that.
But I do think that Jill Tucker was fair and reflected my perspective accurately. You know, I don't think, and so there was that, and then when the mural came, that was like a whole other type of attention. You know, and with that issue, you know, I had. There was no way with that issue also I could have predicted the type of attention that it got. It was just like, you know, I didn't read that right at all. And I don't disagree. I think I did the right thing with bringing the vote back and deciding and putting something forward to cover it. But I felt I was disappointed that I created like a divide, you know, when I really wanted to like unite. So it, I would say that I handled that situation the best I could, but those were personally challenging moments.
Thanks for sharing all those. I really appreciate that. It's, I think it's easy to forget sometimes that our elected officials are human, and that they like it's hard. You can't mind read, you can't figure how things will go, but I appreciate that reflection. There are some, some kind of clarifying questions that are coming up in the chat, and I want to keep moving, but I just want to, maybe there are quick answers here. Is there's a question about like, why did the desire to increase capacity and the staffing question, why did that not go anywhere? You sort of laughed about that not going anywhere, but why didn't it go anywhere?
Because there's no staffing or capacity to work on it. That's
Gotcha.
that's one reason. And it's easy. I should say one of the things that that Rachel and others told me when I started was to pick something and focus on it, and so we have limited time. No matter what you want to focus on, the issues of the time will demand your focus. So what will happen in my experience as a board member, I might have like 15 questions that I need answered, and then next week it's a new 15 questions. And I forgot about the last 15, but I got an answer on 2 of them that I didn't get the other 13, but now the new 15 are the most pressing. So, it was like the opportunity cost of focusing on trying to show up for a community meeting where parents are upset with their principal, or preparing for a closed session next to following up with staff constantly about more staffing when there's like budget constraints, So it just kind of got pushed to the side in lieu of other priorities. So I don't know if that, I mean, it's kind of hard. I don't know if that makes sense to people, but it really is like, it's very demanding. It's very demanding position, and it's hard to stay on top of stuff. And the district's capacity to respond to things when it already has so much to do.
Yeah.
Can I add something there though? I mean,
Sure.
I think I have a slightly different perspective, which is that sometimes I think board members come in and you want like, you feel like you got elected. I mean, running is the most grueling thing I have ever done. Like, it is just running citywide. You have to raise all this money. You have to like somehow find voters to 50,000 voters and get all the endorsements and do it, and it's exhausting. And so you win, and then you're like, oh my God, I have all these constituents. I've made all these promises. I said all these things I was going to do. And I think sometimes people come in and they want to do everything all at once. And that's why I always give the advice, like, focus on 1 or 2 things that you can actually do. But I do think that we have trained our community, unfortunately, to believe that board members have a lot more power than they actually really have. I mean, you started this conversation saying like, what does a board member do? I mean, what we do, we set policy for the district, we evaluate and hire and fire the superintendent, and we pass the budget. That is what we do. And, yes, we vote on contracts, and, there's always a lot of push-pull around that, but like, it's not our job to evaluate principals. We can reflect concerns, we can say, hey, I'm hearing this from a community, or I'm hearing, these things, but ultimately it is the superintendent and his staff or her staff's job to evaluate all those people. And I think one of my criticisms of the board in recent years is that we have strayed a lot into that realm of meddling in things that I think are the superintendent's business. So, the reopening contract is a great example. Like, he came to us in the spring and said, I need this consulting contract. We did a process, we evaluated all these consultants, and we're bringing you this contract because we're not going to be able to open schools on time if we don't have help. And as I recall, Stevon, Mark, and I all voted for the contract, and the other 4 voted against it, which, you know, not to be like super, super divisive about it, but like that was not our job. The superintendent came to his bosses and said, I need help. And this is what I've identified that I need. And we were like, no, you can't have it. You know, and then we also said, but you have to open schools and you have to do everything. And so that is, I think, something that the board has to grapple with. What is its true role? And it has to be disciplined about what it can do and what it really can't do. And it has to support its superintendent, you know, or fire the superintendent. If they don't want to support the superintendent, then get rid of it.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just ask, since we got a little bit of a late start, are you okay staying an extra 10 or 15 minutes for this conversation? Because I think is that okay with you, Stevon, or you're like, I'm out of here? Does that work for you to stay a little longer?
I'm used to a late start, so if people want to stay, I'll stay.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. There's some great clarifying questions really on just procedural and functional things that are popping up in the chat that I feel free, either one of you, if you want to type some answers while the other one is speaking. And so I'll try to get to some of those in a minute. But Rachel, for you, what are some of the challenges that you faced in your 12 years?
Obviously there were some really, really tough votes. Probably the toughest votes that I had to take were several votes to lay off teachers and educators. And then the infamous skip vote where we voted to skip over layoffs for educators in certain areas where we had made a lot of investments. Ultimately, that was overturned legally, but it was a big deal, and it cost me and others the support of UESF for a cycle because they were really angry about that. It was like a bright line for them. And that was a very tough thing. They were, you know, I would not have gotten I wouldn't have been regarded as a viable candidate for the school board the first time I ran if I hadn't had a lot of support within UESF, if they hadn't been really receptive to what I wanted to do around special ed. So it was painful to lose their support. So that was hard. I think by the end, I just got very frustrated with the issue that I just highlighted, right? Of like, does the board understand its lane, and does the board understand like what it really needs to focus on? And you know, the last year was really, really tough. With the pandemic and everything else, and the 9-hour Zoom calls, and you know, I really didn't have any gas in the tank. So that I would say were the toughest challenges.
Thank you. Yeah. As someone who has paid attention to the school board for quite a number of years now, I can see a lot of those. Thank you both for sharing those. So let's move to my next question, which was about superintendent searches and how that works. You are both on the board when Richard Carranza announced that he was leaving. And so you were part of the hiring process for Dr. Matthews. So can you talk about how a board, or how you went about that process, or just anything you want to share about how the board might go about that sort of a process, what you did, what you think was important to do, you know, advice that you might have for the current board as they move through this process again when Dr. Matthews retires in June?
Yeah, so Richard had already left by the time I got on the board, and Mi-Young was the interim superintendent. And we had a search firm bring forward a short list of candidates. We used, I think we used like prepared questions that were provided by CSBA. I could be with some of our own edits mixed into that. So, you know, from there, we got a bunch of resumes. We got a shorter list. We interviewed the final candidates, and ended up selecting Dr. Matthews. So with most districts, that's how it works. Like, they hire a firm. It's usually a process that doesn't that's private because people are in other roles. And it is like it's a pretty grueling. I mean, it's a long process. I think one of the things that I was surprised by um, was I thought so. I had this misconception. I thought that because we were San Francisco and because this is a big job, we would get these from all over the country, and we would have a ton of candidates to choose from. And that really wasn't the case. It was like a lot of cities that I wasn't familiar with, people that were competent public education leaders. But so, I could see this board potentially doing something that's different from that. But I think the process that we went through is the best road to take. And what I say by different is like try to make it more community involved, and it just makes it harder. It makes it harder to get the right person if it becomes like a more public option, public choice.
Yeah, I would just add to that, one of the wrinkles and the reason why it actually is really hard to run a national search is that every state has its own pension system. And so generally the career path for a superintendent, not always, but they start as a teacher, then they're a principal, then they're administrator, a senior administrator, and then they become a superintendent in a smaller district, and then they move up from there. And so if you have, 20, 15 years of pension credits in another state, it's a significant financial loss to leave those and go to a different state. So generally, that's why, when we hired Dr. Matthews, you see candidates from from California. And that was certainly the case. We did not actually do a search when we hired Richard. We hired him from inside. He was our deputy. And so when Carlos retired, that had always been Carlos's recommendation to us that that we hire from within. I mean, because I like to point to Long Beach as the example of this. I mean, if you look at districts, urban districts that have really started to move the needle, it's those that have had continuity and leadership for more than the typical 3 years that an urban superintendent stays. So, Long Beach, Chris Steinhauser just retired, but he was there, I don't know, 10 years, I think, superintendent, something like that. And it's a very diverse, bigger district than we are, and, pretty high achieving on all for subgroups. So, so to me, that was very important is that continuity of leadership, because if you're doing the right things, you want everybody to see like, okay, I got to go with the program, like this person's not going anywhere, because otherwise the people that don't want to change just wait you out until the new guy comes in, and then they can wait that guy out, and it starts churn. So anyway, I think I rambled there, but that's some color on the question.
Yeah, and we'll be for folks who weren't still listening at whatever it was, 11 or 12 o'clock last night to the board meeting. The board did talk a little bit about what they want to do, and so there isn't a clear process yet, but it's starting. So stay tuned for that. All right, so I'm going to pick up a few questions that have popped up here in the chat, and there's so many. So sorry, I know I won't be able to get to all of them, but I'll go up at the beginning. Rebecca was asking, and you can choose either. You both can choose one of these questions to answer. If there was one vote you could come back to the Board of Ed for, which would it be and why? Or what do you look for when you vote for a school board candidate?
I'm going to start with the school board candidate. And so my my disqualifying factor is that you have to have attended school board meetings. And that seems like, if you have not attended school board meetings, I will not support you. And that seems like that's like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised at how many people run that have never actually attended a school board meeting. So, I need to have seen you around, and I need to know that you are paying attention to the issues. I don't really support people based on ideology so much, but I mean, San Francisco is pretty tribal politics, so you kind of can't avoid it completely. But, I start with really like does the person know what they're getting into? Do they know how demanding this job is, and how and really what you're going to be asked to do? Because sometimes people join the board and they're like, wait, what, I mean, there's evidence of that over the years that some people have. So, and then they don't last because they don't like the job. They thought it was going to be something different. So that's sort of the base factor for me.
Do you think there was a follow-up question in the chat also, that was, how do we ensure we elect people who are actually effective at the execution of the job? It's hard to tell when you're seeing, candidates. It's hard to tell which candidates might be good actually in the role. And so do you think that what you just said is that, people who are showing up, who are already active in the community, have some idea? Is that how you would answer that question? Or do you have some other answer to Ruchira, who wrote that in the chat?
Well, I really think it's a big problem that, most people really don't pay attention to school board. It's a down ballot race, and a lot of people don't pay attention to City College either. And so there are institutional endorsers that have a lot of power in the process. And sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's not so great. But it's very eye-opening the first time you run, when you realize that these people you've never heard of are like incredibly powerful in deciding who gets elected to local offices. And I'm not a fan of mayoral control. I don't think that's the greatest idea. I think my best idea is that we've got to have a way to encourage and convince the average San Franciscan who doesn't have kids, who is not involved in schools in any way, that these offices are important, and that professional qualifications are really important, and that you have to do a little bit of research and vetting to find the right people, and they do rise to the top.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, Stevon, which question do you want to answer? Do you want me to repeat them?
I think I got them, and
Okay.
we can do a follow up. It's a really good question about how to decide who's going to be effective at the job. And and I've hired people like that work for me, and even that vetting process doesn't always, the type of person you get isn't always competent. So it's all, like, whenever you're entrusting somebody to do something, there's always like a on the job observation that you're doing, and that's just true, like in multiple areas of society, So I wish I had a better response for you, but for when I am vetting a candidate, when I'm thinking about someone that I'm looking to support, it's definitely changed now that I'm off the board. The number one thing for me is that you have to have a longstanding and authentic connection to our public schools. I think that's really critical. And right now, the most important thing for me is that you want to do the job as it's described, like this being it's kind of hard to, you gotta want to do the job well. And I would say you understanding what the school or like what annual looks like. We're talking about questions that are related to the process and the system. That's an important factor for me. Like you're asking questions about the budget, or you're asking questions about things that the board actually has some real like insight and say into. So there's this aspect of being on the board too that's about like this stepping stone thing that it kind of gets a lot of backlash for. And I was running for supervisor for like 2 months, and then I stopped because of the pandemic. So so the thing about being on the board is because of the capacity issue, it's kind of hard to stay on the board. At least it was for me, So when I'm talking to people that want to run, like those are the types of questions I'm asking, that I'm planning to ask people. Like, what does your capacity look like? Like, do you have stable, like, how are you going to manage your day job and this other work? Like, because it is hard to stick with it and try to earn a living, build a career. So someone having like a good handle on that and a plan for that, it kind of helps me as someone that's considering a school board member. So I think that was one of the questions. Did I miss one?
No, you got to choose. You didn't have to do both. So you're good. You're good. Thank you. Thank you for that. There's another question here. I'm not actually sure that either one of you are going to have the answer to it, but I'll ask it because it's timely. And that is from this parent, Ian, who's asking about, looking for reasons to stay in the district and uncertainty around middle school opening. And they're asking why we should expect schools to reopen in August. You're not on the board right now. You haven't been in meetings for the last 2.5 months. How closely are you paying attention to this? And do you think that there is some reasonable expectation that middle and high schools will open in the fall? I don't know if you feel like you can answer that.
I mean, I guess I would say I really don't, I don't see why, and there's probably are reasons, right? I've been out of the game for a few months, but I don't see why in the abstract that they wouldn't be able to reopen middle schools and high schools. But, I know they're really focused on elementary schools right now. And I think there's some of it is that like, they just want to get that right before they they don't want to make a promise that they can't keep. So I think that's why you're hearing so much uncertainty around middle and high. But from my understanding and, talking to folks around the district, I mean, I think it's possible. And I also think, the president's talking about everybody being able to hug their families by July 4th. So if that's the case, then that means that we will be in a much better place pandemic wise, and there will be much less risk than there is today. So I don't know, I guess I have hope for that, but I really understand. And I my kids are not school age anymore. I have a lot of empathy for how hard this year has been for parents. It has been just brutal. I mean, for everyone. I mean, the staff is so tired. It has been really, really brutal.
Yeah, I think for everybody, right? It's the families who are dealing with it and with so many different situations, the staff, the teachers, the kids, right? Like the kids feel so isolated. We know that there's these increased, depression and kind of mental health concerns with kids. So everybody's suffering. Hopefully we'll be able to get some relief sometime soon. So I'm gonna one more question, if one of you want to answer it. It's probably not terribly brief, but if you can try to keep it brief, and then I'll have you close with the what can parents do to effectively advocate to the board. That'll be our closing question. So this question is from Evelyn. How does a district like SFUSD that serves both ultra-rich and ultra-poor families have success around excellence and equity, given the disparate needs of families on both ends of the socioeconomic spectrum and the increasing segregation of SFUSD schools along class and race lines? How can we have success around excellence and equity, given this wide range of students that we serve in this district? No, it's light, just a light, easy question. Stevon, you look like you want to take a look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Across the district. I mean, this is one of the things that I think I feel like I'm breaking up again.
No, you're good. Your
Okay.
screen froze, but we could still hear you. Go ahead.
All right, cool. I thought that Dr. Matthews communicated like this idea well about like the each and every student. That was one of his big mantras during his tenure. And all of this, like all of these life-changing interventions happen in the classroom. And so a lot of it comes down to how we're onboarding educators, how we're resourcing school sites, and those school sites being well equipped to support the communities that they serve. And one of I think the major frustrations for me, having watched the district and inspirational, the issue is that we can't get ahead of them. Like we know the types of families we're going to get. We know the types of issues they're going to grapple with. We know the types of insecurities around housing or food they may have, and it's sort of specific to sites. Can't get ahead of it, So once we can do a better job of preparing to onboard new youth and educators to be like ready, because our families are coming and we take everybody. So like that's not going to change. But that's the missing piece. And on the places where we do achieve excellence, or the sites where there are stable, there's like a lot of stable families too. I have a puppy here that's trying to eat my light. So let me hold on a second. This is like, come here.
Okay, that's the best interruption.
Yeah. I want to see the
Well,
puppy
I know.
now.
Where's
Where's the puppy?
Oh my
Aw.
gosh.
So
Oh, wow. Oh my
let's see if
gosh.
she'll let me pay attention to this. So this is probably too serious of a question to have her up here. So we do see pockets of excellence though that are achieved. Like Thurgood was one of those where it's young people are achieving outcomes that are like really exceptional and so replicate and is
You're breaking up a little, Stevon.
All right, I'm going to jump in because
Yeah.
he's frozen. But I agree with what he said, and I also would say that I don't know if the question really meant it this way, but it kind of sounds a little bit from the phrasing to me. It rings to me as it's like phrased as an either or, and I don't think that excellence and equity are an either or. I think it's an and. Every student needs excellence. Every student needs equity, right? So. I think what Stevon was saying about stable school communities is really profound. That is a big part of the question, which is why I focused so much on student assignment the last few years of my term, because trying to build a more stable mixture of students and families at that school, at any school, so you don't have schools that are 80% free reduced price lunch while you have other schools that are 20% free reduced price lunch, which we have in this district. So having more integrated school communities allows educators to have more ability to, more capacity to work with those students who really need that intensive help. So that's a big part of the issue. And then, right, how we resource schools, how we put programs at schools, all of those things are important factors in this. But I firmly believe that it is possible and in fact, essential and part of the mission of the district to provide excellence and equity to every student.
Thank you, Rachel. And if people are interested, I don't know, if you like to geek out on this kind of stuff like I do, a good place to read about the research around the importance of stability and leadership and, the kinds of representation in staff, like staff diversity and staff retention, those kinds of things that bring stability to schools. Check out the Learning Policy Institute, just search that name. Learning Policy Institute, it's a research group it was founded by Linda Darling Hammond, and they have tons of great studies to read there about what works and what helps schools succeed in those kinds of ways. And there was also the Wallace Foundation has been doing a whole bunch on principal studies, on effective principals, because we know school leadership matters, and of course so does the teacher in front of a classroom, making sure there's stability there and high quality teaching and instruction. So I think Stevon, like he dropped off. I think his connection was so bad and we lost him.
Yeah.
And so I'm really sad. Hopefully he'll jump on so we can say a formal, oh, he's there. Wait, are you back there, Stevon? Did I just see your name pop up again?
Oh, there he is.
There he is. Stevon, unmute yourself if you're still here.
Looks frozen.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep, you're there. We lost you for a minute.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. Do you want to add anything on, or Rachel kind of picked up where you were leaving off around, she just picked up where you left off, but if you have anything else you want to add to that statement, and then
No,
you good? Okay, well then let's, because you were so gracious, both of you, to stay on for a little while. Let's have like your final words here on how can parents be effective advocates to the school board? Just top couple of tips or what worked for you when you were serving. And that can be our final question for the night. Whoever feels ready to start.
I think I'll start. I think some of the most effective advocacy that I experienced as a school board member is when, you know, a group of families just said like, hey, will you come and talk to us, because we don't understand, or we have this we have this interest, or we have these questions. Would you just come and give us your perspective on this? And when I felt like it wasn't like I was walking into a room where they'd already made up their minds and that like it was about beating me up, but instead that they really wanted to engage in a dialogue, like I found a lot of those conversations really, really helpful, and I learned a lot. And definitely there were a lot of things I changed my mind about over the course of my 12 years. So, because of input and really thoughtful conversations with families, with, people in the community. So I always think just reaching out and wanting to engage with curiosity and wanting to engage in a conversation rather than, showing up as an angry mob actually, encourages a lot more give and take and changes minds a lot better than, some of the other ways that people advocate.
Thanks, Rachel.
yeah.
Nice.
I'll answer. And it is a really difficult, it's like so many different types of board members, and so for me, showing up, so I tried to do something where people came to meetings, I would give them a card and try to make time to talk to them afterwards. So, trying like different methods of communication. And the great thing, this is good. So there would be people in public comment, right? And all people who are elected, they have like a little bit of like egos. And so when they would comment and say, I want to thank this one board member that responded, no one else did. And then you're like, oh.
Yeah, that actually works. It's true.
Yeah. Yeah, the only person that responded to me was like this person. So after you tried and kind of public comments, I tried, I see you and I tried, just put us on blast, it's like, we don't want to look bad. At least I didn't.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I have to say, I will give Stevon a plug that probably lots of people who are on this call have emailed board members. I have certainly emailed board members plenty of times, and Stevon is one of the few who would very regularly respond to my emails. So thank you for that, Stevon. There are a couple who tend to be good at doing that.
I responded a lot my first term. Just want to say that. I just got tired.
First term.
And busier.
Yeah, no, Rachel has been very available to me as well. But Stevon has been a good responder. Some of them excel. That's nice. Guilt. That is your tip from Stevon. Guilt. All right. Thank you both so much for making time to be here and to reflect on your service with us and provide this insight. It's so rare for us to get a time to sit down with folks who have been elected officials after they leave, and get to spend some time reflecting, because it also helps us, as parents and advocates, to just understand the system better, understand more how the board works, and just figure out our place within it. So thank you so much first taking this hour with us. And everybody, I'm going to upload this video to the Second District PTA YouTube page by Friday. So you are welcome to watch it again if you like, if you want to see all these great questions again, if you want to see Stevon's puppy again, you can watch it, and you can share it with others who weren't able to make it, because I know there were some other meetings happening tonight. So stay tuned for the 411 meetings that will be happening after spring break. There will be lots, like every week, some really good meetings happening. So watch for those, and thank you, and have a good night, and everybody have a great spring break. Restful spring break. Try to unplug, from social media and all the things. So, all right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.